Welcome everybody, thank you so much for clicking on this video. And in the video, I'm going to be doing a quick comparison of the PS4 and PS5 versions of the Resident Evil 4 remake. This is one of my favourite games of all time, and when I got my new PS5, this was the thing I was actually most looking forward to playing and experiencing it the way it's supposed to be played. Now, in this video, I'm not really going to be focusing on the aesthetical upgrades. Obviously, the game looks significantly better, the colours are more vivid, everything is more defined, the reflections are better. Nor am I going to be focusing on the obvious load time upgrades, which are vastly superior on the PS5. I was astounded at how quick you can go, not from the game menu, but your PlayStation home screen into a game, which is like less than 15 seconds. So anyway, what I am going to be focusing on in the video is how the PS5 changes the way you play the game, and not just that, but how certain set piece events in the game play out, which some of you might not be familiar with if you're not all that intimate with this game. So I'm going to get into a few now. So anyway, during the initial setup phase after you first turn on your PlayStation, one of the first things it asks you is if you want to insert a disc and start installing the game while you're adjusting the settings. And because I'm old, I do have the disc version on PS4, so I set that rolling while I'm adjusting the settings and whatnot. And the reason I do this is because I was under the impression that PS5 upgrade meant that you install the PlayStation 4 version, then you upgrade that to PlayStation 5. But that's actually not what happens. You simply insert the disc and then you get a free digital download of the PlayStation 5 version. Then these two versions sit totally independently on your PlayStation. They have different save game data files, they have different trophy sets. Anyway, so while I'm waiting for my PS5 version to download, I'm very excited at this point. I'm like a big kid. I have a shiny new PS5 and I want to play with it. So I give the PlayStation 4 version a crack. And even the PS4 version is much better on the PS5 and actually much closely resembles the PS5 than the PS4 version. So anyway, I play that a little bit and my PS5 version finishes downloading, so obviously I get stuck into that. And as I'm walking through the forest right at the beginning of the game, I immediately sense the difference. The camera is much smoother. Everything is much more streamlined. The gameplay is much better. But anyway, like I said in the intro, it's not just that this game is technically better on the PS5, but certain events throughout it play out much differently. So I'm going to get into a few now. So anyway, I get to Del Largo, which is the first boss that you encounter in this game, and just for those of you who don't know, if you let go of L1 after you've thrown each of the harpoons, you can throw the harpoons much quicker. You'll have to get the cadence of the button presses right, but you can kill him much quicker this way. Anyway, at the start of this fight, Largo starts out slightly right of centre, and back on the PS4, when you drag the reticle to the right, and that's what it feels like on PS4, it feels like you're dragging it through treacle to aim at him, the camera will violently jerk you back into center. It's very, very janky, very disjointed, but that's not a problem here on the PS5. Everything is so much smoother, and again, this just doesn't make the game, much better to play, but it actually makes this boss fight much easier than it does on the PS4. So just before I move on to what I feel are the most significant differences between the two games, I just want to cover a few smaller things that I picked up on. One of which being that I am convinced the fire rate on the TMP is ever so slightly quicker on the PS5 version. Now what you can see playing in the background here is a strategy that I come up with back on the PS4 for the opening fight in separate ways. This was hardcore difficulty. And as you can see, after that first burst of TMP, I had 16 rounds left in the mag. But when I used to do this on the PS4, I never once had any fewer than 19. So quite a few months back now, I made a very satirical and very, very silly video where I reviewed all the DLC and all the extra bits in the Resident Evil series. And when I covered the Resident Evil 4 remake version of Separate Ways, I said the climbing was awful and totally inconsistent. Now that is paraphrasing slightly. I did use profanity liberally at times in that video. And while in my defense that is actually true, the climbing is dreadful on the PS4 version of the game. For those who watched that video, which admittedly was not many at all, for those who don't play the game on the base PS4, they must have been thinking, what is this guy on about? Because the climbing is significantly better here in the PS5 version than it was back on the PS4. So for me, one of the biggest disparities between the two versions of the game is aiming through the scope on the sniper rifles. And I say that not just because it's much more mechanically efficient on the PS5, but because using the rifles is so integral to getting through the game, particularly the village section of the game. The bolt rifle will just annihilate things, even bosses on professional. And for those of you who have played the game on the PS4 will know how truly awful this is. It's barely functional at times, it's laggy. I'm pretty sure there's input delay. You move the analog stick and nothing happens. That's not a problem here on the PS5 though. It's all very smooth, it's all very responsive. And this makes taking down bosses like El Gigante much easier. Even on separate ways, the most optimal way to defeat Pasanta, which is the first boss in separate ways, is to use the bolt rifle, and it's basically just a parade of headshots, which is much more easier on the PS5 because you're not solely confined to aiming with the camera and then quick scoping it. You can actually aim through the scope and then adjust your aim while looking through the scope. And it's such a luxury to have after you put all the hours into the PS4 version, and struggled with these bosses. It's much easier. And not just that, it obviously makes the game much more fun to play. It's not just that these improved mechanics make existing boss strategies much easier, but you can also now implement other strategies involving these scope sniper rifles in other areas of the game. And one area which immediately comes to mind is the double Gyarados room. And as you can see playing out in the background, there's a really quick and really efficient way of getting through this room involving the Stingray sniper rifle. And for those of you who play on PS4, you're probably thinking to yourself, yeah, this is nigh on impossible to pull off on the PS4. It requires you to line up shots really quickly and hit them really accurately. And yeah, just good luck pulling this off on the PS4. When it comes to this particular example of the double Gyarados room, it's not just that being able to use the rifles here is much more optimal, it's also much more efficient than other alternative methods which expedite getting through this room. So you can also use 3 heavy grenades and 1 hand grenade. That's on professional. Obviously, it's got to be slightly less ordnance on the lower difficulties. But obviously, this is a massive allocation of resources which you are no longer going to have to use thanks to being able to use those rifles. I also noticed that certain set-piece events throughout the game play out, slightly differently here on the PS5. An example I'll give you is the Village Siege section at the beginning of the game. Now, just to preface this, you can get through this section in 2 different ways. You can run around for 5 minutes, wait for the church bell to go off, and then move on. Or you can kill 15 enemies and get through it that way. And the most efficient way of doing that, certainly in terms of time anyway, is to use the 2 guaranteed hand grenades that are in the village and throw them into clusters of enemies. So anyway, you can see it playing along in the background here. But when I used to do this on the PS4, the cluster of enemies when I'm stood on the roof to throw the second grenade simply just they wouldn't appear sometimes. And I remember often thinking, it's like, is this a technical deficiency of the PS4? Are they struggling to, be rendered or loaded in? And obviously, I never really knew either way. But now I played the game on the PS5, I can say that yes, this was a technical deficiency of the PS5, the PS4, because I've not had this problem happen to me yet on the PS5. Now, obviously, this, regardless of whatever platform you're playing on, this section is a nightmare due to the inherent randomness of events that play out. But like I say, this is much more consistent on a much more advanced piece of hardware. Cabin is another good example of where a cluster of enemies that should spawn in didn't spawn in back on the PS4. Now, Cabin is similar to the Village Siege at the beginning of the game in that it's predicated on either a timer or on a kill count, and once again, killing enemies is the most optimal way to go in terms of getting through this in the most timely fashion. You kill the 2 enemies by each of the 3 windows, and then the one that spawns in behind them in the left-hand window, and then this will spawn in a new wave of enemies by that left-hand window. You launch the grenade out the window, you get 10 kills, and then the rest of the enemies will start dropping the boards. But once again, when I went through here on the PS4, this cluster of enemies just failed to appear, and this was incredibly frustrating because Cabin is one of the harder sections in the game, and when things don't go to plan in here, this room can spiral out of control really quickly. So in this game, Leon and Ada in the DLC Separate Ways will actually run faster when in a state of combat. Now, a good way to tell that you're in this combat state is the more exaggerated flailing of their elbows while they're running. And something that you can do while you're in this combat state is crouch, then immediately cancel the animation by running again in kind of an intermittent fashion. And as you can see here, you will actually run faster this way than running normally. And this can be extremely useful for simply YOLOing through areas when you don't want to get hit and you don't want to expend any resources. And once again, this is much more smoother and much more consistent to pull off on the PS5 than on the PS4. And in fact, when I used to do this on the PS4, I thought I was kind of getting the cadence of the button presses wrong, because I would often find that the character would sort of stumble forward instead of getting that smooth up and down running motion that you want doing this technique. Having said all that, though, that doesn't mean that everything was easy once I started playing the game on the PlayStation 5. For example, when you go through the abandoned factory in Chapter 2, back on the PS4, this second enemy that's in the room with all the bear traps, he was kind of there, the lights are on, but often there was nobody home, and I could just run up to him and start stabbing away his face, and he would often die before he even realised that I was hacking away at him with a kitchen knife. As you can see, though, this is not the case on the PS5 version. As soon as I enter the room, he's already there and agitated, and he's kind of already there spoiling for a fight. A similar scenario happened in the clock tower. Now, if you skip the cutscene with Salazar when you enter the clock tower, this first enemy here on the PlayStation 4 is not even there yet. He's not even spawned into the clock tower. He kind of appears just next to you when you get to the bottom of the stairs. And even then, like his mate back in the abandoned factory, the lights are on, but nobody's home, and you can just run past him. But again, that's not the case here on the PS5. He will turbo you, he will charge you as soon as you skip the cutscene with Salazar. He'll try to, batter your face in with his flaming club. Another one was the Salazar boss fight itself. Now, a little cheeky nugget here that some of you might not know about: if you throw one of the 2 golden eggs that you find throughout the game at Salazar, not only will it deal 70% of his health, it will also stun him as well, so you can just whip out the broken butterfly and you can kill him in seconds. But here's the thing, on the PS5, Salazar actually enters the boss arena a couple of seconds sooner. And this is important because the hitbox on Salazar's weak spot, which, well, I guess Salazar himself, right? It's not very generous at all, and you have to hit the weak spot flush or it doesn't register any damage. So the fact that on the PS4 he enters the arena just a couple of seconds later just gives you time to line up this egg throw. And yeah, I find this bit slightly easier on the PS4 than on the PS5. Now, you've probably been wondering why for the last few seconds I've had footage of the Resident Evil 3 remake playing in the background while I've been ranting on about Salazar. Well, that's because the Resident Evil 3 remake, like the Resident Evil 4 remake, plays much differently on the PS5 than it does the PS4. And this boss fight against Nemesis in the waste pit is a perfect example of it. Now, something to know about this boss fight is that when Nemesis is running around the perimeter, the higher the frame rate you're operating at, the shorter the duration that he will spend up there. So obviously this is going to change the way the boss fight plays out on the PS5. And when I used to do this on the PS4, when he jumps up there, it was sort of a little bit more random which tank he would jump on. But now I'm playing on the PlayStation 5, he has always jumped on either Tank 1 or Tank 8. And this not only speeds up the boss fight because he spends less time running around, but it makes it more consistent as well. A similar scenario popped up when I was playing RE2 Remake on the PlayStation 5 during the crane boss fight against Birkin. So a little crafty trick here is you can sort of glitch the barrel of the flamethrower through this metal door, and you could actually deal damage to him here before he even enters. And when I used to do this strategy on the PS4, which is you kind of just run straight past him here, as you could see, you run along this corridor, and when you drop down onto the boss platform itself, you press the button to send the red freight container away. And then when I kind of just circle back, Bacon had yet to even drop down off the platform above into this arena. But as you can see now, as soon as I poke my head around this container, he is already there. This is like a significant difference. He's like 4 to 5 seconds ahead on the PS5 where he was on the PS4. And as you can imagine, the first time I come through here when I played the PS5, I did not see this coming at all, and he kind of just took my head off. Well, there it is. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed making the video and sort of recording and getting some of my thoughts out there on Resident Evil 4 Remake. And if you're someone like me who's been fortunate enough to play both the PS4 and the PS5 versions of this game, or any of the other modern Resident Evil games, you know, Resident Evil 8, Resident Evils 2 and 3 remakes, I would love to hear from you in the comments about what differences you found between the two games. You know, was there anything that I missed? Did you find anything that was better about the last gen versions of the game? Let me know in the comments. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.